everyone, and welcome to episode 1 of Photography 101 with me, Christine Joy. So today is basically just back to the very basics of photography and exposure, and it might seem very simple for some, but it's just the type of things that I wish somebody had taught me when I had just started. So it's mostly for those of you that are just picking up a camera for the very first time and you have no idea what goes where. So I'm just going to help you to figure out how to set your camera manually and how to work out exposure. Okay, so there's 3 components that come into play when we're setting our exposure. The first is aperture, then shutter speed, and your ISO. So the first thing we're going to speak about is aperture. The aperture is basically the hole in the lens and the size of the hole. So firstly, the hole in the lens has to open up in order to let light into it. So obviously the bigger the hole is opened up, the more light can enter. The thing just to keep in mind when setting your aperture is that the smaller the number is, the larger it is. So in other words, this is my favorite Canon 50mm and the aperture is an f1.2. So when it's set at 1.2, it means that it's wide open and there is so much light that can come in. But if I had to close it up, say to around f16, it means that that hole is going to be really small and less light is going to enter. A handy way to think about your aperture would be if you think about the pupil in your eyeball. If you're in a dark room, your pupils are going to be quite dilated because they're trying to let in as much light as possible. But then if you suddenly have to walk outside into the bright sunlight, you'll see how they quickly contract and close up because they don't need to let as much light in. A very important aspect to keep in mind when setting your aperture is that the wider your lens is open, the shallower depth of field you have. So in other words, I love shooting at a wide open aperture, usually about 1.8 or 2. But what that means is that only things that are closer to the lens will be in focus and those in the background will be more blurred. So when I shoot portraits, I always make sure that my subject's eyes are in focus, but then even from their hair will start getting a bit soft and the background is usually completely blurred out. And in a lot of cases you also get that lovely bokeh effect where you have light spheres in the background and it looks very soft and warm and it's great for portraits. Then when your aperture is a lot smaller, around from f8 up to f16, it means that you're going to get a lot more in focus. You're going to have a much deeper depth of field. So it's not necessarily only the things that in the foreground that will be in focus, but it will be focused all the way through to the back. So this might help a lot in landscape photography. You obviously want everything to be nice and sharp, even in food photography. So that's also something just to keep in mind when you are setting your aperture. Next up, we're talking about shutter speed. So the easiest way that I can think of to explain shutter speed would be if you look at how a film camera works. So when you take a photo in a film camera, what would happen is this curtain opens up in your sensor, allows the light in, which then burns the image onto the film. So in other words, the longer the shutter remains open, the more light is coming in. But if you don't need that much light, it's just going to open for a short space of time. So this is also what happens in our cameras today. Depending on how much light you need will depend on how fast your shutter speed needs to be. So out in the daylight it can be really fast, like from 1/200th of a second. Anything can get much faster than that. Or if you're shooting in the evening, you can do long time exposure, which can be anything up to 5 minutes. Just to do a comparison of how quick shutter speeds can be, I've now set my camera to 1/1000th of a second, you can hear that. And now I'm going to set it down to 1/5 of a second. And these images look completely different because at 1/1000 there is very little light to come in. There's a very short space of time that light is coming in to create the image, where it was 1/5 of a second. It's opened for a lot longer, so there's a lot more light that can come in and expose the image a bit more. In most cases of shooting, or from my personal experience, I try and keep my shutter speed as quick as possible because aside from a moving subject, your hands are also, depends how steady your hands are. So I've learned that I can shoot to a maximum of about 1/60th of a second without getting blur, but I prefer not to go slower than 1/100th of a second. Especially just working with people, they're moving, my hands are shaking, so you just want to always make sure that your image is correctly focused. You also get a lot of artistic effects for long time exposure if you want to take photos of star trails where you keep your shutter open for a crazy length of time. I think it's about longer than half an hour, and you can actually capture the trails of the stars. And also people enjoy taking photos of like car streaks, their lights at the night. So you can get a lot of artistic effects from your long time exposure. The last component of the exposure triangle that we're going to discuss is the ISO. Basically the ISO is just the light sensitivity of your camera. So the higher you set your ISO, the more sensitive your sensor will be to the light that there is available. So usually during the day I'll keep my ISO at about 200, and if I'm shooting a wedding in the evening without a flash, I can push my camera up until about 5,000. An important thing to keep in mind with your ISO is that the higher it is, the more noise you will have on your pictures. So for some people that don't mind it, it's a bit of a grainy artistic effect, but if you want the cleanest, crispest image, you should keep it as low as possible. An important thing to keep in mind also with the amount of noise you have on your pictures would also just be the model of your camera. So for example, with my Canon 5D Mark III, I know that I'm safe to shoot up until about an ISO of 2000 and the noise isn't bad at all. But in the past, when I was shooting with the Canon 60D, anywhere from about an ISO of 800, the grain would start to get quite bad. So it's also just important to know your own camera and how it works, and don't go push your ISO to the limit and then you have a noisy picture that you can't even work with in the end. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you could learn something from this video about how the different components of exposure work. And in next week's video, we'll be discussing how they work together and how you can manually expose your images. Thanks for watching. Bye.